I don't like this joke anymore. Well, after the Still Here cinematic released, it seems like the entirety of League's community got some hunger for lore again. And now we got a new wave of people who just really wanted me to talk about a 40-second cinematic. I mean, I've done worse. So sure, let's talk about Syndra cinematic and let's talk about why exactly is this cinematic so relevant. As always, all of this originates from a totally separate update. Less than a week ago, Meddler came out once again and he talked about what we should be looking forward to when it comes to Wild Rift. Now yes, I understand that some of you may be surprised because Meddler, kinda a League guy. So what is he doing here talking about Wild Rift? Well, in case you don't know, Meddler is actually the head of League Studio, which means that he's overlooking both League and Wild Rift. Also, it is interesting to see that in the Wild Rift videos specifically, he doesn't call himself Meddler, but Andre. Which, to be fair, he always called himself Andre, even in the League videos. But here even the pop-up name hides that he is Meddler. Is it because Wild Rift is aimed more towards the Eastern audience? And in the East, all devs always try to look more professional? At least when applicable. Anyway, I'm diving off again. In this Wild Rift update, first, he thanked everyone for sticking around with the game, and he hoped everyone enjoyed the new content such as Arena in Wild Rift, as well as the new variations of Ultimate Spellbook, and he confirmed that there would be more game modes like these. Which is great to hear, although I am aware that Wild Rift is also having some fun time with gacha systems. Though I'm not surprised, it is aiming towards the East after all. After which, Meddler dives into a very important point. To quote him, they also want to give Wild Rift deeper and richer experiences outside of the game. And as a part of this is their newest approach to storytelling. Of course, all of this ties to the news we got towards the end of 2023. The news that everything comes out of League's IP will be part of the same canonized world. Now what's interesting is that in the past, at times, Wild Rift already dipped into this canon universe. They had some minor integrations with Arcane 1, but more importantly, they had some bigger lore drops during the Sentinels of Light. Yeah, how many of you remember when Senna actually visited her own grave? Cause I surely almost forgot. So, to make the entire story of League more cohesive, Wild Rift is joining everyone else. Which is really awesome to hear because now Wild Rift feels in a lot of ways like Legends of Runeterra. You may not be playing this game, but every time something comes out of it, you can enjoy it regardless. I feel like a lot of people will view Wild Rift the same way now. Every time this game gets a cinematic or a trailer for a champion, people can now look at it and enjoy the universe it is presenting. Which in many ways is actually a clever move from Riot's part. Here Meddler mentioned that we should be expecting some new champions, events and other things that will try to unify the world a bit more. The goal is to make Wild Rift a great place to get connected with the universe. Apparently they have some plans to revisit some older stories. I assume this will be done through launch events and releases of some of the champions we got in League, because sometimes they are also accompanied by these quick comics in Wild Rift. But sometimes the champions also get a canonized look. For example, besides Syndra, we also got Talon, who here is a lot closer to what he's actually supposed to look like. So yes, every time a new champion drops into Wild Rift, we can also consider it their new proper look. Although take it with a pinch of salt, because every time a champion appears somewhere, there will be some minor differences because of stylization. Anyway, here Meddler also confirms that they will expand some stories. Which means that we should keep an eye on the fact that Wild Rift will also give us some new canon stories. Here he added that Wild Rift will have some ties with Arcane 2, and as part of this, Mbessa Medarda will become a champion in Wild Rift as well. So be ready for some wild crossovers between all the games. But that's pretty much the most important news we got from this update. So now, how does all of this tie into the 40-second Syndra cinematic? Well, it is exactly what Meddler mentioned. It is revisiting a story that we knew about. Specifically, this cinematic is trying to recreate a scene from Syndra's story called The Dreaming Pool. You see, very simply put, Syndra was a powerful mage who suffered from some mental instabilities. A little bit of hatred, a little bit of pressure from your teachers, and a little bit of puberty can do a lot to you when you are trying to learn magic. Like killing your masters and stuff like that. The point is, Syndra is also very dangerous. And so, the Masters of Ionia locked Syndra underneath Ionia in a very special prison. Specifically, underneath the fortress of Phalor on a western Ionian island. They dipped Syndra into a magical pool of water which made her instantly fall asleep. That's why they called it the Dreaming Pool. As long as she was enjoying a nice bath, she would stay asleep there. But of course, many years after that, the Noxian invasion of Ionia happened. And if you look at the map, you can see that Noxians successfully took over the entire island where Phalor was located. And so, the Noxians took over the fortress and they studied the magic underneath it. Which is when the Dreaming Pool story happened. The TLDR is that some Vastayan Ionian activists decided to kill Syndra, because she was still very much a threat. Now more than ever, since Noxians took control over her location. So they snuck beneath the fortress all the way to the pool, but in a chain of betrayals, backstabbing and visions from Soraka herself, instead of killing Syndra, they freed her from her prison. Which is exactly what we can see here in this cinematic. See, the cinematic is even called The Rise of the Dark. The theme should be very obvious. Here at the beginning you can actually see the roots which are sustaining Syndra, which is a very big point of the story. Syndra is actually centuries old. And in the story, the Vastayan activists were wondering why was everyone around Syndra dead, while the land itself wanted to keep Syndra alive. I mean, if nature wanted to get rid of her, it had the option to just do it. Which always hinted that Syndra had some kind of a higher purpose. Especially since Soraka also had visions about her. Now after this, we get a shot of Syndra waking up with perfect makeup. I guess that's canon too. And after her slumber was broken, she woke up. Which is when it all zooms out and it shows us the roots which make the foundations of the Dreaming Pool. But unfortunately, in this entire shot, you can't see any of the other Vastaya who were on the mission to get to her. Riot likely didn't want to make entire new models for a 40-second long cinematic. Which is understandable, but these other Vastaya were also part of the story. I mean, in the story, when Syndra woke up, she plunged one of the Vastaya down into the pool instead of her, so that they would take her place in that prison. So right now, there is another living soul in the Dreaming Pool. And yeah, unfortunately, you can't see them here. After this, Syndra unleashed her power again, and the scene cuts to some floating rocks in the sky. Which once again is a very important canon moment from the story. At the end of the story, when Syndra unleashed her power again, she ripped the entire fortress of Phalor from the ground and just floated away with it. So right now, Syndra has an entire floating castle somewhere around Ionia, which is totally not a setup for Riot's MMO. And that's where the cinematic cuts off, because yes, we only had 40 seconds. And now you can live with the fact that yes, this is technically canon. This is what happened in her story. Now technically, this isn't the first time Wild Rift gave us a cinematic that would be considered canon. Sivir got a whole minute and 20 seconds of just killing bandits without any real point. Although at the end, Azir called after her and he summoned her to Shurima. Because yes, Sivir is still Azir's bloodline. And before that, we got another cinematic, which I also believe was prepared to be canon. And that's Vladimir's cinematic. This one showed us Vladimir after he decided to go out of hiding, and he decided to rejuvenate his body to become part of the Noxian politics again. This was a stellar cinematic, which obviously didn't have any budget for sound design. You can hear that all the sound effects are taken from a sound library and none of them really fit the animation. Also, obviously, no voice acting, which is how we get something so beautiful such as this. Simply amazing. Before that, we also got a cinematic with Urgot, which was pretty cool, but again, not much has happened there. There was also one for Swain, where he just showed his transformation. But my favorite one Wild Rift has ever done still goes to the Witch. That one was just glorious.
Hello! You must be here to admire my illustrious collection.